What can I say about the Metroid series that hasn't already been said? It's one of the most influential game franchises of all time. It has memorable worlds to explore, iconic heroes and villains, fun gameplay, an atmosphere and tone that not many other games can truly replicate, and some of the greatest games ever made. It's half the namesake for the Metroidvania genre of games, and even among the later masterpieces that were inspired by it, Metroid still sits comfortably with the best of them. The Metroid series is one of my personal favorite Nintendo franchises, and while new games are few and far between, it's always a special occasion to get to see a new Metroid game. Well, for the most part. I wasn't sure if I would ever get to experience it again, but only 4 years after Samus Returns on the 3DS, we're getting another new Metroid game. And this time, it's not a remake. And not only that, it's Metroid Dread. The Metroid Dread. This game was rumored to be in development nearly 15 years ago, and I thought for sure that it got canned. I thought it would witness the heat death of the universe before this game came out, and yet here it is, only 6 short weeks away from hitting store shelves. All this hype surrounding Dread is getting everyone excited, even people who have never played a Metroid game before. I have 2 friends that both just played their first Metroid games after the announcement of Dread, and they now consider themselves to be fans of the series. See, us Metroid fans are like parasites that will never stop trying to assimilate innocent people into liking our series with us, and so far, I think I'm doing my part.
What did I do to deserve this?
See? He likes it. With the release date of Dread fast approaching, what better time than now to take a look back at the history of the franchise? This video you're watching right now is only the first part of my 2D Metroid review series. I'm gonna release a new video once a week every week until the release of Dread, reminiscing on every game in the 2D series, including remakes. With 6 entire games to cover, let's not waste any more time, and let's jump right into the franchise's humble beginnings, Metroid for NES. After the success of Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda, Nintendo saw fit to work on an action-adventure game that combined the platforming aspects of Mario and the non-linear exploration of Zelda. Knowing they wanted to create a sci-fi game set in outer space, the team started work on Space Hunter. Yeah, that was the original title for the game while it was still in development. I guess it's accurate to the gameplay, but it's pretty basic. That'd be like if they called Zelda a sword stabber, or if they called Mario Jumpman. Wait, forget that last part. By combining the words Metro and Android, we got the final title, Metroid, which I definitely think sounds much cooler, however random it might be. With an aesthetic heavily inspired by the movie Alien, the developers at Nintendo and Intelligent Systems started work on the game. Wait, Intelligent Systems? Up until I started working on this video, I had no idea they were involved in working on this game, so that's pretty cool. They would go on to work on other Nintendo-owned series like Paper Mario and Fire Emblem, and they even had a hand in Super Metroid, but we're not quite at that game yet. Anyway, Metroid was a commercial success, and would go on to sell over 2.7 million copies. Believe it or not, this is actually the second best-selling game in the entire franchise, just barely behind Metroid Prime. Even though this is a cult classic series that receives universal acclaim for most of its entries, Metroid games tend not to sell very well, or at least not as well as some of its contemporaries. It's not even in the top 10 best-selling Nintendo franchises, weirdly enough. This can be chalked up to different reasons for each game, but the point is, despite the high sales for this game in particular, I never see anyone talk about it on its own merit. It's usually just an afterthought when people are talking about the entire series, like what I'm doing right now. Yeah, so the original Metroid never meant a whole lot to me personally. Like, I've always appreciated it for kickstarting the series and laying the foundation for its later games, but this game on its own just never really stuck with me. In fact, before playing it for this review, I've only ever beaten it to completion a single time. Every time I've tried to pick it up since then, I would always just drop it shortly after getting the first upgrade. Why is that? Is this game just completely outdated by today's standards, or is there still some fun to be had? After all, Zero Mission is my personal favorite 2D Metroid, so if this was the basis for that game, surely there must be some good here. Only one way to find out. Let's finally get into the game proper. Emergency Order! Defeat the Metroid of the planet Zebeth and destroy the Mother Brain, the mechanical life vein. Galaxy Federal Police, M510. This intro is a little goofy and really poorly translated, but I'll let it slide. This is the first game in the series, and it doesn't start off too complicated for a newcomer. You don't really need to know too much more than this your first time going through, although the manual does give a more detailed description. Space pirates have stolen dangerous creatures called Metroids from the Galactic Federation, and the pirates intend to use them as biological weapons to take over the galaxy. The Federation tries to attack the pirate base on planet Zebes, with an S this time, but is unsuccessful. Their last resort is to send a lone bounty hunter to destroy the pirate base, the Metroids within, and their leader, Mother Brain. The only one suitable for this mission is none other than Samus Aran, the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy. As soon as you hit start, you can see that Samus has already made her way within the caverns of Zebes and is ready to begin her mission. Alright, first impressions. I love this rendition of the Brinstar theme. It's probably my favorite song in the game. The game also does a great job of really making you feel like you're deep in enemy territory, and that you're heavily outmatched by the enemies surrounding you. This is due not only to the stellar art design and atmosphere, but also just the way that Samus feels to play. See, Samus starts the game off feeling incredibly underpowered. Probably too much so. Her only weapon is almost completely useless. The shots only go out a couple feet in front of her, and she can only shoot in 3 directions, left, right, and up. She can't shoot straight down, and she can't shoot diagonally. This means that she doesn't have any way to hit any of the shorter enemies unless they climb a wall or a ceiling. Samus also only starts off with 30 health out of a max of 99. Why? Am I really expected to grind for health every time I start a new game? The enemies here deal tons of damage. I know I'm going to need every last bit of health that I can get. It makes you wonder why Samus is considered the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy if she can barely kill a little bug that's crawling on the floor. Is it too late for the Galactic Federation to pick someone better suited for the job? None of these complaints are me comparing this game to later Metroid games, by the way. This is something that other games released around the same time got right. For example, Mega Man always starts off with full health, and its beam reaches the end of the screen, as it should. Contra gave the ability to aim in 8 directions, making airborne enemies much less frustrating. Making Samus so weak to begin with was unusual even in its time, and no other game in this series is this punishing to start off with, so I guess they learned their lesson pretty damn quick. Also, side note, when you go through doors in this game, enemies can follow Samus through and even hit her while you're waiting for the screen to transition, leaving her completely defenseless. Seriously, what the hell was that? Again, this is something that got fixed right after this game, so it's just one of the many little quirks you gotta put up with when you play this game. We all know how this next part goes. If you try to go to the right when you first start, you'll hit a dead end. This game is hardcore, and it makes you go to the left to get the first upgrade. Most games from this era had the player exclusively move to the right for progression, so the way that this game very subtly conveys to the player that they'll need to go both left and right to progress is incredibly smart game design. After making my way right once I get the morph ball, I come across this massive vertical shaft, and now I'm about to take back all the nice things I just said about the game's design. Every single set of platforms in this shaft look pretty much exactly the same, and it can get pretty difficult to tell where you are at points. And when I say it looks the same, I'm not talking about the graphics. I mean they literally just copy and paste the same layout like 10 times in a row with almost no variation. And pretty much the entire game is set up this way, with rooms that just constantly repeat themselves, and rooms that share identical set pieces with other rooms. This makes each area not very memorable, and makes the use of an external map or guide almost a necessity. After meandering around the long corridors and vertical shafts for a bit, I find the first missile upgrade. Using this first set of missiles, I'm able to backtrack and get the long beam, finally letting me shoot across the whole screen. I'm then able to push forward through a long hallway and get bombs for my morph ball, and on my way back I hit a secret area to get the ice beam, although the ice beam is located in a really dickish place. This has been a pretty fast slew of upgrades here at the beginning of the game. It's been exciting to find all of them, but believe it or not, these are actually most of the upgrades in the game less than 20 minutes in. Once I get the ice beam, I'm then able to get the Varia suit right away using a sequence break. I'm able to weasel this little enemy into the area above, and then... Was this an intended way of getting the Varia suit early? I know you're normally supposed to need the high jump boots for this, but this outside the box syncing also seems like a perfectly valid way of doing it. Once you look past the dodgy programming of this enemy, that is. It's cool that sequence breaking is present all the way back in the first game of the series, because sequence breaking is one of my favorite aspects of playing Super Metroid and Zero Mission. Going back a little bit, after getting the morph ball bombs, you actually have everything you need to explore almost the entire map. This is where I decided to get the Varia suit, but nothing is stopping you from leaving Brinstar and going down to one of the more difficult areas. The channel Game Maker's Toolkit has a great series that reviews map design for Metroidvania games, and one of the points he brings up in his episode about Super Metroid is that it would take options away from the player at certain points to ensure they won't get lost as easily. This game never does that at any point though. If you're not playing with a guide, this is where the game can start to get really confusing, and it can be quite overwhelming for a new player. I'll link his video in the cards and in the description. It's a great watch, and it shows how much the series has matured since this game. Next stop on our way through Zebus' wild ride is Norfair. I'm glad that I decided to go for the Varia suit early. It doesn't protect from hot temperatures in this game, rather it's a simple damage reduction bonus. But I know that I'm going to need it going through here. If the enemies here aren't too short to hit, then they're hyper aggressive, and they'll knock you into lava faster than you can kill Dragon. Eventually, I make my way to this vertical shaft, and I discover gaming's most well-kept secret. There's no indication that these blocks are breakable or that this is even the correct way to go, but finding these completely random bomb blocks here at the bottom of the shaft is mandatory to beat the game. I imagine this is where a lot of people who didn't have a guide quit the game. The idea of the mandatory path forward being so obtuse and random is just baffling to me. The Varia suit and Ice Beam were also placed in some weird ass spots, but the Varia suit is optional, and the Ice Beam can be found in 2 different locations, which increases your odds of finding it. I brought it up a few times already, but I'm not ashamed to admit that I did use a map to beat this game. I don't think there are really any purists out there that care that I'm not getting the authentic experience or whatever, but nobody should feel bad or stupid about having to use a guide for games, especially this one. I mean, hell, games like this were probably made as confusing as they were just so they could sell you more issues of Nintendo Power. They probably assumed you were going to use a guide anyway, so just prove them right. My nice and helpful map let me know that the high jump boots were in the next door to the left, and shortly after that I can also pick up the screw attack. Getting the screw attack makes the rest of the game pretty much a total cakewalk. It isn't quite as reliable as it would eventually become in later games, but it's still a good way to one-shot a lot of the tougher enemies. Compared to the beginning of the game, it's a chore to even die at this point. The juxtaposition of pre and post screw attack power level is insane, and it makes me wish the difficulty was balanced just a little bit better. The game was probably balanced this way to highlight how powerful you'd become by the end, but it shouldn't have achieved that by omitting abilities Samus should have had to start off with. There is also the Wave Beam further down, which does more damage and has a wider attack pattern that can hit those shorter enemies. The issue is that the Ice Beam and Wave Beam are mutually exclusive in this game, and I'll need the Ice Beam to make it through the final area. As cathartic as it would be to finally hit those shorter enemies, I opt to skip the Wave Beam. At the bottom of Norfair is the entrance to Ridley's lair. I've been enjoying the music up until this point, but this song sounds more like an alarm clock than it does a foreboding dungeon. Ridley is one of 2 bosses that you have to kill in order to reach the final area of the game. If you've ever played Zero Mission, you know that Ridley is actually supposed to be the second boss that you kill. I don't know if that order was also intended for this game, but I'll just say right now that it is definitely easier to fight Ridley before Kraid. But before I can fight him, I have to find him. Luckily, Ridley's lair is actually quite straightforward for the most part, and there are even multiple paths to reach him. The only exception is this room. In order to get through here, you have to find 1 bombable floor tile and then sneak your way under the rest of the enemies to reach the door. The problem is that there's only 1 of these tiles in the entire room, and the room itself is massive. While you don't need to go through here to reach Ridley, there is an energy tank behind this door, so it's definitely worth your time. Just make sure not to fall for the funny Kaizo blocks. Ridley himself is pathetically easy. You can stand right next to him and just spam missiles and he'll never be able to hit you. Even if you run out of missiles, he takes damage from the normal beam shot, so it's still doable, it's just a bit tedious at that point. And once Ridley is dead, that's all there is left to do here. There aren't any more unique upgrades to find, and you probably found most of the missile upgrades and energy tanks on your way down here. It's pretty much just an uneventful run back to the elevator. Norfair isn't much better in terms of how interesting it is to backtrack through, although there is a set of 25 missiles free for the taking in this upper section. I guess Nintendo decided to use their copy-paste powers for good and throw the players a bone here. Making our way back through Brinstar, almost to the beginning room of the game, we come across this room with crumbled blocks leading to an area with enemies below. The appearance of the cracked blocks make it clear that they're able to be destroyed, and the presence of enemies show that it's an area worth investigating. This is the entrance to Kraid's lair, and I feel that it's actually conveyed relatively well, especially compared to what we just went through in Norfair. Why couldn't the whole game be like this? Kraid's lair is a bit more meandering than Ridley's lair, but once again it isn't too difficult to find out where to go. Although I will point out that this entire upper right area is completely useless and it doesn't even contain any upgrades. I'm guessing it's only here to confuse the player. How nice. Kraid is definitely the harder of the 2 bosses between him and Ridley, but this is exactly why I went for Ridley first. Ridley's Lair gives access to additional energy tanks, which are quite helpful for tanking damage from Kraid. Although maybe I went a bit overkill because Kraid isn't actually all that difficult anymore. The best way to damage Kraid is by rolling into him, spamming morph ball bombs. Man, this is a far cry from the Kraid fights in the later games. I kinda feel bad for him here. Once you do beat Kraid, it's time for your final shot back to the top of Brinstar. Like Ridley's Lair, Kraid's Lair is a bit of a slog to backtrack through, since there isn't really anything useful here that you wouldn't have found on your way down. Oh, look, it's the funny room. You have to go this way to escape, and the only way back up is by breaking these blocks and gaining height when they respawn, hoping they don't knock you back down and wipe out all your progress. How fun. At the top of Brinstar is a weird room with two statues of Kraid and Ridley. You can actually visit this room from the beginning of the game, and it's pretty likely that you'll see it when you're looking for the first missile upgrade. Killing the bosses lets you activate the statues and builds a bridge to Tourian. Here there are only 4 straight hallways that lead to the final boss, so it's impossible to get lost. However, these halls are filled to the brim with the most difficult enemies in the game, the Metroids. Yeah, for a game named after these guys, they sure waited quite a while to finally make an appearance, but I kinda like that about it. It builds suspense on how dangerous these things must be if you don't get to see them until the end, and I feel like they're worth the hype. The only way to kill these things is with a well-placed ice beam shot, and then 5 missiles while they're frozen. This is why the ice beam is pretty much mandatory to beat the game, as much as I would have preferred the use of wave beam. While it isn't absolutely necessary to kill the Metroids in order to progress, it can be a good idea if you're low on resources. The Metroids are by far the most generous enemies in the game when it comes to item drops. They drop either 30 health or 30 missiles, usually making grinding a non-necessity here. Usually. Once I make it past the rooms with the Metroids, I find myself in Mother Brain's chamber. The only way to make it to Mother Brain is by breaking these barriers down using missiles. And this is the part where the game can really start to test your patience. These turrets shoot bullets in these stupid annoying rings that feel like they have aim hacks despite only traveling in a straight line. You will get hit by these things, and the knockback can set you off course while you're trying to shoot the barrier, letting the barrier regenerate while you're not shooting it, making you use even more missiles to get through. This is where all those extra missile upgrades come in handy, so I hope you were able to pick up a few extra on your way here. Once I got to Mother Brain, I didn't feel like I had enough missiles to finish the fight against her, and fortunately the game actually lets you backtrack out of this room to grind for drops, with the barriers remaining destroyed. Unfortunately, I had some of the worst luck imaginable at this point. See, you need missiles to kill Metroids, but if you're lucky enough to get them to drop missiles, you profit way more than you used to kill them. But that didn't happen to me, and I ended up wasting a ton of missiles just to get health drops that I didn't need. So now, not only did I not have enough missiles to finish the Mother Brain fight, I barely had enough missiles to even kill a single Metroid. This meant that I was only left with one option. I had to backtrack all the way to Brinstar and grind the weaker enemies that not only drop fewer missiles, but also drop them even less frequently. It took me nearly 20 minutes to grind for a measly 30 missile drops. It was at this point I said screw it and returned to Tourian. Thankfully I did get lucky with the Metroids this time around, and I was able to get back to an acceptable missile level pretty easily. But all that grinding that I did was not even remotely fun. Let it be known that recharge stations in the later games are an absolute godsend, and I will never take them for granted again. Now that I'm here at Mother Brain, I think it's safe to say that this might be one of the most annoying boss fights in any game ever. She doesn't attack you directly, but the only vantage point you have to shoot her with is directly in the line of sight of these turrets. The rings they shoot can be really hard to avoid, and they do a lot of damage on their own. They can even knock you into lava, and if you're really unfortunate, the pit directly in front of Mother Brain, where it's almost impossible to get back out, not only due to the rings, but the fact that Mother Brain's jar also gives you knockback. So once you get through all that, after landing the killing blow on Mother Brain, the game decides to give us a massive seizure. Cue the escape scene. You get about a minute and a half to climb this enormous vertical shaft with an obviously copy-pasted layout, so I guess some things never change. One thing I will note is that the music for this escape scene has a more melodic second half to it that's never present in any other version of the song throughout the series. This part makes you feel triumphant, like you're essentially on your victory lap as you escape the Space Pirate base, and I wish the other games kept this part in. Once you reach the top of the chamber, take the elevator and the game immediately ends. Great! You fulfilled your mission. It will revive peace in space. But it may be invaded by the other Metroid. Pray for a true peace in space. Again, this is obviously a rushed job at localization, but it's so funny that I don't care it's here. But it is a bit anticlimactic to suggest that the galaxy still might not be at peace after the mission I just went through. Also, what does it mean by the other Metroid? Maybe... Nah, it can't be. This ending screen is one of the most famous in gaming history, because if you beat the game in under 3 hours, this is where it reveals Samus's gender to the player for the first time. Even the manual I mentioned earlier refers to Samus using male pronouns, which could either be a mistranslation, or it could be a smart way to not spoil the surprise for the player here. Many others have already said it, but having female representation in an action-adventure sci-fi video game like this is completely unprecedented, and it helped inspire female protagonists for many amazing video game franchises to come. What I find especially admirable, though, is the fact that the game, or the series in general for that matter, never draws any attention to this. Samus isn't a badass warrior despite her gender, she just is a badass warrior, which is awesome and empowering. There are multiple endings depending on how quickly you beat the game, with Samus taking off more parts of her power suit the faster you go. This would eventually become a series staple, and every game after this one would also feature different endings based on completion time. Once the ending is finished, the game immediately restarts with all your upgrades intact, except for missiles and energy tanks. If you're able to get the ending for beating the game in under 3 hours, Samus also wears an alternate costume of the outfit she wore in that ending, although her hair is green now if you have the Varia suit for some reason. You can also immediately start the game with this costume by using the famous Justin Bailey password. Speaking of passwords, while the original Famicom version had a save system with battery backups similar to Zelda, the North American release didn't have that luxury, so they created this password system instead. Each password was long and cumbersome, so starting with Metroid 2, Nintendo had the sense to start putting battery backups in their international versions of Metroid games. The password system is still pretty interesting, and there are even ways to put in sort of cheat codes if you know what to enter. I already mentioned Justin Bailey earlier, but there's also this one, NAR Password, or Narpa Sword. This password gives you unlimited health and missiles, so if you want to take your rage out on the game after the nightmare it just put you through, here's your chance. Looking back at this game, I'm starting to see where future games got some of their most important ideas. The way that this game gives you a second playthrough with the Justin Bailey outfit, it's kind of encouraging me to go back and beat it again. This time maybe speedrunning it or setting some other kind of challenge for myself. I actually kind of like the way this game looks too, despite how repetitive it gets. Getting upgrades is empowering and it makes me want to continue the hunt. But while this game contains many of the core components that make the later Metroid games great, it's still tainted by the obtuse and lazy level design, and the fact that Samus starts off so incredibly weak. Those are my two biggest problems with this game. Metroid games are all about exploring, but the world isn't interesting to explore when every room shares its layout with like 6 other rooms nearby. Everything being hidden behind secret blocks doesn't make me feel like I'm exploring, it makes me feel like I'm constantly hitting my head against a brick wall. The enemies are completely unfair because you can't even hit most of them, and they do so much damage and give so little health back that it makes the early game a complete slog. I know it's not really fair to compare this game to the games that came after it and learn from its mistakes, and it was probably at least partially like this due to hardware limitations, but I just can't not compare them. Those games do exist and they provide a much better experience than this one does. I respect Metroid on NES for getting the ball rolling on the series, and there are parts of it that I genuinely like, but it is outclassed in just about every way by every game that came after it, and that makes it very hard to go back to in the modern day, unfortunately. Next up, we're going to look at another game in this series that was limited by the hardware it was on, and would also eventually be remade and replaced in just about every way. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. It'll be out a week after this video. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment. I normally hate asking for likes, but this is a new style of video for my channel, and I want to gauge interest for more stuff like this in the future. Anyway, that does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week for Metroid 2: Return of Samus. Take care.